great to see so many of you this morning. It's an honor to have you participating in the workshop today. In speaking about some opportunities to support historically excluded and underserved communities, want to start with thanking so many of you participated in the focus groups, interviews, survey, and set of listening sessions that our team here at the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation and the broader RAFT core team held over the course of the last several months. And these listening sessions were an effort to understand challenges, gaps, effective collaborations, and elevate opportunities for resilience across the Middle Peninsula region. And so we had 65 different individuals representing 60 organizations, from local government to nonprofits to church and faith-based communities, and are so grateful for the many perspectives that were brought to bear on these issues. We're super thrilled for support from the Jessie Bell DuPont Fund for these conversations, and are grateful for all of your contributions. What I'm going to talk about here are just the opportunities that can inform this resilience prioritization process today. But we are pulling together a broader summary report of all of those conversations that we'll be sharing out in the coming month or so to continue to guide and inform implementation. So thanks especially to all of you who participated. I want to cover first just a few of the key sort of overarching themes that we heard over and over again, and that really were elevated to the top. And then we'll dive into at least giving you all a survey of some of the specific examples that could potentially show up on checklists today or be combined with other priorities today. So hoping to give you some fodder for thought. And Nelson, if you can pop a link to the summary report. We shared this out earlier, but if you haven't yet, please feel free to dive deeper into this document as a resource. So some of the key opportunities that we heard was around broadband access and computer literacy, particularly this being elevated within the context of COVID that we're all living in, and sort of the ways in which broadband access creates opportunities, access, remote work and employment, school when it was online. And so that was really key on people's minds. Transportation and connectivity more broadly across a region, especially a largely rural region, was important. And there were many specific examples that touched on transportation. Affordable housing and shelters, including emergency shelters during hurricanes and other events, winter storms, but also long-term shelters and affordable housing sort of beyond immediate crises. Youth services and childcare, again, COVID has elevated some of those things, particularly childcare, but also recognizing that for young people to stay invested in the region, having opportunities for them in programming is important. And then also access to medical care and mental health services as a critical need of the region, and again, is tied to things like transportation as well. Workforce development was another theme we heard reiterated in employment opportunities, which ties into business resilience and some of the items that Elizabeth already mentioned in looking at the scorecard results and opportunities. And then relationships with local tribes, and really thinking about what meaningful collaboration, coordination looks like, and where there's opportunities to tackle shared priorities. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just touch on a couple of examples. There was a lot of rich fodder in the conversations that we had, but today I'm highlighting those that are specific to historically excluded and underserved communities. So we heard, there's an opportunity to create a shared database regionally or across localities to identify where there's vulnerable populations and to understand what the needs are. Additional funding to be identified for Bay Transit and other transportation services, youth services and childcare, especially in counties where there aren't YMCAs and other institutions. More translation services for ESL students and families who don't speak English in the region. as well as access to the internet, GED, and community college resources, particularly in temporary housing or addiction treatment facilities. We heard, specific examples of what increased service information provision could look like would be sharing information about services and grants to residents channeled through the Department of Social Services. I know we have a lot of those folks here today, and or the resource councils, which are very active in the region. And then also education about local history and the resilience of Black residents, women, working class fishermen, and others that have traditions of resilience and but have often been left out of traditional narratives. Next slide, please. Participants in the focus groups and interviews also talked about providing more affordable housing and long-term shelters, particularly affordable housing for watermen and increasing access to the waterfront, support for living shorelines, especially for those who can't afford to install them themselves, handicap access to community gardens and master naturalist programming. Some other creative ideas: a farmer's market with the Upper Mattaponi tribe to provide food to King William County. And then some broader sort of structural planning pieces that are longer term, creating frameworks for transparent cross-locality and tribal collaboration that acknowledge limited capacities, but also focus on shared priorities, and then increasing representation, diverse representation in government boards, councils, and nonprofits in the region. So to conclude this kind of brief touch point on the breadth of information here, as you can see, some of the items here are really long-term actions that require structural change, deep partnerships, committed planning, and the hope is that the RAFT process and the resilience action checklist that you all create today can be moved forward and sort of achieve the longer term items in time by being catalyzed through this year of implementation.